Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone, depending on where you're at in this world. Thank you so much for joining us on our third episode of Juniper's Higher Education series. Today, we are continuing the discussion on efficiencies for universities. My name is Kia Cottrell, and I'm going to be your host. And I am joined today by Mike Newcomb, our CTO of Higher Education.
Nice
So,
to see
Mike,
you.
reminds me, where are you at in the world? You just moved, right?
Yeah, well, used to be in St. Louis, Missouri for probably almost since I was eighth grade. And then we made the decision to move out here to Yukon, Oklahoma, Northwest Oklahoma. So right in the middle of the United States still, but it's definitely been a nice transition just to come to someplace different to be near more family.
Awesome. Home of good barbecue, I hope.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, don't be fooled by the accent. Although I'm American, I am actually in the UK, just outside of Oxford, which is home to one of the top universities in the world, and which is exciting because that's actually one of our recent customers. But for those of you turning in, we'd love to hear where you're from. So don't be shy. Feel free to drop your location in the chat window, along with any questions you have throughout the session today. We want to keep this as interactive as possible. So please feel free to join in as and when something comes to mind. Well, Mike, I'm going to start with a little bit of a loaded question because I know you've been working in higher education for quite some time, and not just from an ICT vendor, but also as a professor. So, from your experience, when it comes to networking and ICT investments, what do you see that's keeping university leaders up at night?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. Being able to have the ability to sit on both sides of the fence, the infrastructure side as well as the professor side, I can tell you that the direct impact that we have, it's about how to deliver consistently good learnings, right? What we call learning outcomes in the industry, so that when a student enters the system, they stay in the system, they're taken care of through the system and eventually graduate, and that they receive the outcomes that they're paid for. For example, if you were taking a class in C++ that I've taught in the past, though, that's an example of where they say, okay, you should know how this affects you, not only for your job, but did you get what you needed to then go into the workforce and have this sort of sets of skills. And so a lot of what attacks this from the networking side is all that instruction today has always been in class, and I've done that. And by the way, having tools in the classroom really make a big difference as an instructor to be able to really make it more than just a guy lecturing and turning on a projector. This is about interaction. It's about having enough bandwidth, for example, and other applications to track that kind of thing. So that part of being an instructor and having to eat that network capacity and be able to have access to tools such as the ability for it to be conjunctive with roll call is really important. And so I find that in general, Pat, before now, yeah, we would always deal with networking as just a way to get on the internet, right? It's, in some cases, it's a gaming thing for the students in the class, which I have to monitor. But, it really is about having that experience that the student has, understanding what they're doing, and then being able to deliver additional aspects to that.
Absolutely. And I love this concept of the network actually helping or aiding in those student outcomes. And you mentioned network capacity, which is really interesting. I mean, we're in 2021, where the average person, regardless where you're at in the world, you're usually traveling with multiple devices. And it's the same thing for students, right? It's not just their laptop, their mobile phone, maybe their smart devices, but also it's the applications that they're trying to connect to. So when you're deploying a new network or you're migrating a new network, what are some things to consider to maximize that investment, but also achieve any potential cost savings?
Yeah, and that's a really good question, Kia. The situation that you have here, especially when it comes to networking, is this understanding of the paradigm shift that has just happened in this industry in the last 2 years. It's definitely changed. Again, if you think about it, how often do you have to worry about what we call single purpose devices that are there to do one thing, right? And most of the things, for example, in wireless were developed, 10 years ago, back before the iPhone, and it really hasn't had a lot of innovation. And so that particular structure of having this innovation take place allows you to now have the ability to say, I want to do more. The network should be more of what I call an actual added value situation, where there's, rather than just a way to get on the internet and share things. And so this is where we've done a lot of work, and probably the biggest reason why people are flocking to Juniper always has to do with all the additional things that you can do. And again, I know this is about cost containment or cost minimization and application maximization. That's an example of having something that as a platform can do just a lot more to help address things that the university needs to have in order to keep and attract students, but as well as being able to provide the basic fundamentals.
Well, it's interesting because when I speak with university stakeholders, and actually any stakeholders who are looking at deploying a campus environment, if you will, I think there's a great opportunity to drive efficiencies by establishing what I like to call a dual purpose network. Now, you use the term single purpose device, but actually, if we can think about that infrastructure layer as being more than just, providing Wi-Fi to campus or providing your IP networking capabilities, there's so much more that we can see. And specifically in Europe, I've seen a lot of universities who are using this as an opportunity to also host other applications. For example, using the BLE in our APs, which is Bluetooth, to actually deploy different types of applications that are delivering student services. Is that something that you've seen as well?
Oh, absolutely. We've had significant traction with a lot of large universities across the United States that have come to us, and what they realize, probably first thing, is what we just talked about, this single purpose use device. When you look at the underlying architecture that a university has, it's based on a situation where everything is kind of built by hardware that can do one thing, right? And I'm just going to say the one technical word. I'm trying to stay away from being technical on this call, but the whole thing with controllers, for example. And it makes a difference because in the way things have been done, and as universities look to project what they need to do in the future, they have to understand that if the way things were done is having an architecture that is very limited, structured, and can do one thing, and then when they want to do something else, like in the recent times, we've had COVID strike, and things like contact tracing, applications that needed to be quickly developed and leveraged, those things weren't able to happen very easily in that other architecture, because everything that happens needs to happen with an add-on. And when you start adding on pieces to stuff that is from another vendor, or like, for example, the Bluetooth capabilities you talked about for location and proximity tracing, that's a big deal, because now you're adding even more complexity to a already complex network, which then again goes to a lot of extra cost, as opposed to having something that can now leverage and be pivoted toward doing a lot of new things like contact tracing, proximity tracking, and even things like roll call, which we can talk about later if you like.
Yeah, actually, so it's interesting comments, because I'm thinking of two questions. And the first one I want to touch on is this idea that you're hinting at, this controlling architecture, if you will. If I'm a university or a campus leader who's responsible for migrating my legacy network, or really on my journey to this cloud environment, number one, how do I justify this investment? And number two, once this network is deployed, how can I maintain the level of cost efficiencies that really aligns with that long-term ICT transformation?
Sure. Yeah. So when you look at what has been architected in the past, and you look at all the attendant costs that go along with it. So, for example, in that architecture, you're going to have controllers that basically talk to access points, for example. And then again, what I'm going to talk about actually goes past just Wi-Fi and switching. So, but in essence, this one piece shows you that if you've got this architecture that can do this, and then you decide I want to do contact tracing or I want to do even location services, then you're forced to go out and buy something else like a Bluetooth enabled device. That may not even be as good as what we already do. We have an array in ours, which really gives us fine tooth, a fine set of directional capabilities down to 1 to 3 meters versus something that might give you 10 meters, right? So when you're looking at that controller-based thing that we're talking about, and you start saying, I got to have a cost to go add that. And then, by the way, the hidden costs become things, Kia, like I had a university tell me that they were very disappointed in the huge amount of money they spent, 6,000 beacons, because they thought they would get, again, more services for their students. And so they put all these things out there, and then they didn't realize that every 6 months they've got to dispatch people to replace batteries in 6,000 access points, or in 6,000 beacons. So, and then when somebody wanted to say, what about location services and telemetry and all that, they had to go buy more stuff. And so that whole architecture, as you said, that's what they struggle with because they're trying to tack on. And so to justify what they do, they realize now that it's not just about the hardware. And as you alluded to, it's really about what else can you do. And at the same time, can you reduce the cost of what it takes to keep the lights on? And then deploy those services to do neat things that could not be done in the past, like IoT type devices being hooked in, or again making and understanding how the student is affected as they're on campus, to maybe look at things like wellness and how well that they're able to be integrated into the campus situation to allow you to do better retention of students. So those are just a couple top of mind items.
Absolutely. And I think that the data-driven insight that you get from that network is absolutely critical then at this point, especially going back to your first answer, which was, having a network that really helps transition the journey of a student, right? So what are those student programs that we're seeing, and just thinking to some of the examples I've experienced myself around, push notifications to students when there's emergencies on campus, and those types of additional value-added applications that are built on top of your connectivity infrastructure. And I mean, have you seen type of similar discussions happening in the U.S. as well?
Oh, absolutely. I'll give you a couple. So, for example, a very large research network down in Texas. They had a goal of being able to not only just have better coverage from a Wi-Fi perspective or from a switching perspective, and they'd used another vendor at that time. When they came and they saw what we could do, it changed how they looked at the network. And so in this particular institution, they took advantage of our location tracking, the ability to have a fine level of understanding of where people are on the campus. So imagine a new student comes in to the university, first time maybe, so a freshman. And by the way, in the first 90 days is when you start realizing that freshmen might not get acclimated to the college life and may not be able to go anywhere. Well, in this particular case, they've taken the time to say, okay, here's the map of the campus. Every building is there. They have an application that sits there and allows them to see where they are on the campus. And if they want to go to the student union, they can go in and look at the student union and see how to get there. It'll do a blue dot map to get them there. And in addition, looking at other things that could happen, especially in the COVID world, to say, is that safe to go into that particular room, right? Because is there too many people, social distancing, that kind of thing. So this kind of structure from location tracking is important, even to the point of being able to say, I'm going to integrate it with my instructors. And as a professor that's been on campus, you're not always in your little cube or your little room. You're someplace else on campus. And if the campus is big enough, if the professor is sitting in the cafeteria, he could say, hey, I'm here. And to be able to say to the student, you can find me, click a button, and it takes them all the way to the campus so they can find their instructor. So that's one thing. A second thing is about the safety of the students themselves, right? So we have a huge, and again, size doesn't matter, large, small, it's all something we do very well. But in this particular case, we had an institution in the East Coast a very well-known one, that was looking at the best way to handle contact tracing, specifically to understand how to mitigate what happens with COVID. They've been very much involved in the early development using Bluetooth and things like this. But for them to be able to now say, oh my gosh, I've got something with Juniper that's different. This platform offers me the ability to now offer in one thing everything that I ever wanted, because this particular institution was going to try to build it themselves because nothing like it existed. And I will tell you that the VP actually says the words, it was like a dream come true. And so now this allows us in this institution, they were able to quickly pivot to something that made a lot of sense in terms of contact tracing, being able to understand what students have dwelled where on the campus, to understand from a facilities perspective that maybe these rooms have been more active with too many people and maybe that they need more cleaning. But from a contact tracing perspective, to be able to say if that student self-reports, again, we're not violating any HIPAA things, we're not keeping track of it, but the administration is now able to go back 30 days without having to do anything because all this stuff is tracked up into the cloud versus on somebody's server. And so now they're able to say, hey, these are the people that have been in proximity of this person with COVID over the last 30 days, and here's how long the dwell time was. And so that's an incredible thing to be able to do when it comes to contact tracing, and to be able to have that kind of data to then protect the campus, protect the people, instead where a lot of times campuses have to close an entire building because they say, hey, this person was there. Now maybe they can say, hey, maybe this floor needs extra cleaning. We keep it set and safe and keep the rest of the campus open.
I think that's brilliant, Mike, because this actually spans from not just student outcomes, but now we're even looking at things around campus and facility management. So unfortunately, we only have 1 minute left, but I just wanted to recap a couple of the main themes that I think we talked about today. And really, it's this idea of establishing a controlling architecture that not only meets your networking and connectivity needs, but also can serve as a multi-purpose layer for student applications, or to your point, location services, which of course then leads to really good data-driven insight for planning and management of facilities and also student well-being. And I think that's really an interesting take on how to leverage your ICT investment so that it really maximizes the value.
Yep, absolutely. Kia, there's only one other thing I will mention is that, when you talk about an architecture, it shouldn't be just what's on campus. It should be able to extend to a remote campus. And there's definite differentiators here that this architecture brings, because imagine everything being in the cloud means that you're able to now extend your research efforts securely to the home. The professors that are doing Zoom are able to actually have a better quality experience, and the people that are responsible for managing it will get that as well. So there's a lot of things we do there, as well as other things for remote campus. We will talk about that more in a facilities discussion in one of the future sessions, but definitely something to think about when it comes to that architecture platform you're talking about.
Yes, and speaking of future sessions, be sure to tune in next week on May 26th. Well, Mike will be continuing the discussion with Lauren all around space optimization. And I love where this is going, because I think this whole concept of beyond the campus is relevant, it's timely, and we'll definitely be talking about that in weeks to come. So please sign up. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us directly. Again, thank you so much, Mike, for joining us. And thank you to everyone who tuned in. Hope you all have a great day.
Absolutely. Have a great one, everybody.